Text talks for nonfiction, 3 prompts to use all year long that are going to make your life a whole lot easier. This is what I'm going to talk about today. What's a text talk? Aren't book talks for novels? So I'm going to talk about the nonfiction version of this. Independent work versus whole class instruction, how you can use this strategy to teach whole class lessons as well. Adding mini lessons on summarizing text structure and purpose. I'm going to show some student examples, presentation choices, audience participation, and grading. Let's get into it. So first of all, how did this develop? What did this come from? I have been teaching for 21 long years, and I am a book-loving teacher, as I'm sure many of you are. We used to do something called book talks, and this was a little page that I gave to my students to remind them of how to do a good book talk. And I have since learned a lot of things, and I'm doing things a lot differently now. One thing I want to talk about is how this strategy that I've come up with is a standards-based approach to book talks. So if you look at this chart here, I feel like you would be challenged to find anywhere that students would be practicing or gaining mastery in any of the standards. Maybe speaking and listening, but not super standards based. Did I love doing this? Yes. I mean, I want kids to develop a love of reading. I'm not saying, book talks are bad or anything, but there's just a better way to do it. And I'm going to show you what that is today. So what is a text talk? It is, in a nutshell, a technology-enhanced presentation about a text that can replace reports, quizzes, and reading logs, while also increasing student engagement and learning. The basics of what it looks like in a class is read with a purpose, time to work, present to class. 3 questions, 3 steps, super simple. Repeat. The 3 prompts that I have come up with for the nonfiction text talk, and they're the same prompts for the fiction one as well, but just a little tiny tweak here and there. I'll do a separate video about fiction, but both fiction and the nonfiction I use all year long. So the 3 questions are, what happened? And they're focusing on summarizing. How did it happen? And they might be focusing on text structure or word choice, vocabulary type stuff. And why is it important? So what was the author's purpose for the text? What did you get out of it? Repeat, 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 repeat. They will get so good at it. How this developed was during distance learning. So during distance learning, one day we were in class and then the next day we weren't. And it was a bit of a shock. My students did not go home prepared for that. They didn't have novels at home. I didn't get to give them any novels to take home. Trips to the library weren't happening. And it really made me realize how dependent I was on novels in my teaching, because I couldn't use a novel anymore because I had all of these students who I was teaching in a Zoom, which was hard enough to keep them engaged as it is. If I was just going to read a novel to them on Zoom, it would not have gone well. So I was forced to evolve and do some different things. And at first I was kind of freaked out about it, but it ended up being a great, great thing. And that's why I wanted to make this video and share it with you. So first of all, I want to talk about some of the elements that using the technology version, text talk versus a book talk, how it can increase the amount of choice students have. It can increase their engagement. It can increase reflection. So many benefits to this. This picture right here, I want to talk a little bit about this experience that I had. So, this is a picture of a stack of books that my daughter wanted at the bookstore. And this was like when she was in high school. All throughout her school career, she had an English teacher mom who was nonstop bringing home books. I know all the books, I read all the books. These are the great books kids are reading right now. I think you're going to like this one. I think you're going to like this one. She never liked any of them. She was not a reader. And it was so disappointing to me to be a reader and have children who were not readers. Both of my kids were not readers. And I realized that the problem was is that I was choosing the books for them and I was not choosing the right books. So I took her to the bookstore. Unfortunately, it just took a long time for me to figure that out. Took her to the bookstore and encouraged her to pick out whatever it was she wanted. And I was really surprised by the stack of books that she chose because I would never have chosen any of those books for myself or for her, but that was what she was interested in. So, choice of texts is important. Also, now it doesn't want to do my second thing. There we go. And if I make mistakes, I'm sorry, but I'm just going to keep going because otherwise I'll remake my video 100 times because I'm always going to make a mistake. Also, talk about this a little bit. This is a reading inventory that I gave my students every year at the beginning of the year. Super simple, no prep, piece of paper. And I had them tell me about some things that they liked about reading and things that they did not like. And it was a real eye-opener to read all their responses. And what I learned from this is that not only do students need a choice in what type of text they're reading, and not just reading, but is it an audiobook, etc. But they also need choices in how they demonstrate their learning. They need choices in the method of accountability for reading and choice in environments and conditions. So this student liked reading books. She has book clubs on the Things That Rock side. That's not an independent activity that you're doing by yourself. So this student liked to be reading books with other people and talking about the books together. This student did not like assigned books. This student liked doing AR quizzes and reading challenges. Some of these things I wouldn't necessarily do, but I have to also wonder if there aren't other things on the list because this is all that they have experienced. So keep that in mind too, that maybe your students just haven't experienced something that's different from what's on the list. But the big eye opener for me was how different everybody's chart was. Everybody didn't have the same things on things they did not like about reading. Some kids love audiobooks. Some kids don't like AR quizzes. So what that taught me was that there needed to be opportunities for students to have some kind of choices in how they're reading, what they're reading, and how they're showing what they've learned. Choice can be a gateway to getting reluctant readers to engage with text, as you saw with my example from my daughter. Allowing students to choose their own texts, choose responses to text, and choose how they will complete their work can be a great motivator for students. And that is a quote that I took out of a professional development that I did, and I would use it all the time because I feel like it's an important thing to point out. How does it increase reflection? So I want to talk real quick about how doing this digital version that I'm going to show you today can increase student reflection and why that's important. This is an early version of their digital portfolios, which we do in Google Slides. And this student said, we got to make slides about any book that related to the hero's journey. The book I did my slides about was Arusha and the End of Time. It was really amazing to spread my ideas and information to other people. What? So happy when I read that. I hope people can acknowledge the power of books. It was like this kid was saying what's in my reader heart. Was so happy when I read this. No student has ever described a reading log or an AR quiz in this way. For me, I could stop right there. It's a win. It is a win. But let's go on. So, text talks can create opportunities for audience, student choice, reflection, and all of that equals increased engagement. By the way, on that reflection page, one of the great things about using the portfolio and having these text talks being digital is that when students would stand up in front of the class and do a book talk, holding their book, maybe a visual aid, they have no way to go back and look at that again at a later time to look at their growth and see how they've improved and all the new things that they've learned. And I think that doing it digitally and having them go back and look at some of their earlier versions has been a super powerful thing. And I can show you some more examples of that. Using it as a whole class lesson. So, especially in the beginning when you're first starting to do this, although it is very, very simple, I would recommend incorporating a mini lesson into it. And I will show you what that looks like. But add the time in for a mini lesson, maybe shorten the text. So instead of 20 minutes, 15 minutes, read with a purpose, time to work, present to class. So the same 3 steps, but we're just adding a mini lesson at the beginning. Another great way to kind of scaffold this in the beginning is use it with the textbook. It works with any nonfiction text, and the textbook is great because one thing, this is my history textbook right here. One thing that the textbook includes at the beginning of each lesson, all textbooks I'm sure have this, some kind of a summary. So these are the main ideas, or it's at the end of the lesson and this is the lesson summary. So it's kind of modeling that for them. And I would do a mini lesson here to get students to maybe write down all the main ideas, go to the end of the lesson and write down, there's three summary statements at the end that go with that. And then how can you combine all of those things into a statement that summarizes the text? It makes it a whole lot easier for them. I also teach them about the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, and why, to do a summary. I have a note-taking page that I give them when they're reading the text. I'll show that in just a second. But let's talk about the text structure piece, the how does it happen. So first, do mini lessons on summarizing if they need that, then move on and just have them do a single slide. So instead of doing all 3 questions, we're going to have mini lessons on summarizing. You're going to do a slide where you summarize, and that's it. Then move on to text structure. So you would maybe still do the summary, but also now you're going to add in text structure and have mini lessons on text structure. And again, this is why the textbooks are so great for this, because usually it tells what the text structure is. In my history book, it did. And then we can use some graphic organizers in our mini lesson to identify the causes and the effects. A wonderful tool to help them start learning how to identify text structure. I give them little charts with signal words. These are the words that signal cause and effect. Do you find those where do you find those in the text? Etc. So start slow, start small, work your way up. It will be worth it because later on you won't even need to give them slides. You just tell them to do the activity and they just do it. This is the note-taking page that I gave them. So if we're doing the textbook, it's nice to have a little note-taking page for them to write down some stuff so that they can quickly create their slides when it's time to do the work. Here's what it looks like in a whole class lesson. This was one that I did during distance learning. Start with a check-in. and we move on over here, I'm going to introduce, this is your stories that you get to choose from. Now, because this is a lesson from our history class, kind of going with history and English together, I did a lot of that during distance learning because we only had one class meeting time and I taught 2 subjects. So we combined a lot of our history and English together. Their focus was about culture and what we can learn about the culture of ancient civilizations from the stories that they told their children. So we had a collection of myths, fables, etc., from different ancient cultures that they could choose from. And these collections I took from Epic. And I discovered Epic during distance learning. I had known about it, but I thought it was just for like elementary school age kids, little kids. It was a great resource to use during distance learning. So many collections, if you're a history teacher, so many collections of these types of tales from different civilizations. The ancient China ones are graphic novels. They're all super short, like 5-6 pages max. Loved it. So then we have our mini lesson. We're learning about culture and the different elements of culture that they might notice in the story. But we're not using this yet. This is there on your own. We're going to do a shared text together, and that was in the form of video because we're doing this class meeting. TED has a lot of great videos that go with this type of lesson as well. Then together, so I can see them all doing the work and catch if there's some things that kids are having trouble with and kind of correct that and do some reteaching before they do on your own. So these were 3 things that I wanted them to record from the story. And then, so these were like the slides that I had them do. We just did it together in a Nearpod. Then I gave them the same exact slides to do on their own. Choose your story, do your slides. And here's what it looked like on a student's website. So like I said before, we did a lot of these digital portfolios in Google Sites. And there's procedures for how they write up reflections and all that good stuff. And if you want to learn more about that, I have a different video that talks about grading digital notebooks and portfolios. And I talk all about this whole website thing in that video. So if you're interested in that, you should check it out. But, so this is how it looks. They put their slides or an image of one slide on their website and they write a reflection about it. And they liked these assignments. Everything I read from my students on their websites, they all loved this. So again, the engagement was up. Reading with a purpose. So we talked about the 3 steps. It's reading with a purpose, doing the work, and presenting. Reading with a purpose, if you can give choices in this area, it is a good idea. Adding choice is important again. Here's some options. There's video options, there's text options, and there's audio options. ListenWise is a great one, but it does cost money. There's a lot of podcasts out there that kids could listen to. News articles are good to use. CNN 10, love that one. That's a great one. And then one of my all-time favorites, of course, TED. I love everything TED does, but National Geographic Short Film Showcase. So the example I'm going to show you from a student is from an assignment we did using those. And I love them. I did have to watch a lot of them to come up with a list of some that are okay to use for a class, because some of them go up to 30, 40 minutes. And to me, that's not short. So I watched a bunch of them and selected ones that were 5-6 minutes or less. I think the longest one was 8 minutes. And I made a playlist. So if you check on my playlist on my YouTube channel, you can save yourself the work of watching a bunch of them to see which ones are the best to use and just use my playlist. But read with a purpose. So start with a mini lesson so they have a purpose for their reading. Are we going to be focusing on text structure? Are we learning a new text structure? Summarizing, vocabulary, and word choice. So maybe if your text that you're using is an argument, You might be looking at word choice. What words do the author use? That's in the how does it happen. So what words does the author use that are convincing in their argument? What words do they use that show bias? You get the idea. But that all goes under the how does it happen category. Another way to give students choice, and you may be familiar with multimedia text sets. If you're a person who's into hyperdocs, they talk about multimedia text sets a lot. This is a great activity to do with a multimedia text set. So how do you have students respond to what they learned on that text set? This is a great thing to do with that. I would not start with a text set that had this many resources on it the first time you give them one. I would give them maybe 3 choices, and that's it. But this is also a great way to add in nonfiction standards and skills when you're doing a novel, because a novel takes a long time. And that whole entire time you're teaching the novel, you might be missing out on the opportunity to be practicing and working on mastery towards the standards that are in the nonfiction section. Time to work. So there's a couple of ways that you could do this. It's not just slides. Like, slides are great. I love slides. But Jamboard also works really well if you're doing it as a whole class. Do it as a one-pager. Each kid has their own thing on the Jamboard, and then they just present when their Jamboard frame comes up. You can do it using Pear Deck or Nearpod, like I showed. Very good thing to be doing. Slides is fine too. I love slides. I use slides all the time. But there are options. Back to the choice thing again. So it's time to work. Maybe you couldn't add any choices with the text. Maybe it was a textbook lesson, like I showed with my history textbook. So they don't have an opportunity to make any choices about the text. Try to incorporate choices then for how they're going to be working. Students might want to be working with a group, and that's fine. I think that's a great thing to be doing. Some kids don't like to work in groups. I know that teachers have brought up concerns about kids working in groups on these types of activities, any kind of like book talk, book presentation type of activity, because the concern is that some of the students in the group will have read the book and some will have not, and they're just kind of skating by on other people's work. And I would say that's fine. And here's why. I had a student, it wasn't during distance learning, but I had a student who was always working in groups with people on their book presentations. And they weren't reading the books. I knew they weren't reading the books, and I knew they weren't doing the work. But it just kept going, and I just kept observing and encouraging. And eventually, that kid just wasn't ready yet. And eventually, one week, they did their own book. And they didn't work in a group. And at that time, it was like a March Madness brackety thing we were doing with our presentations. And that kid won the bracket that week. So maybe working in a group and experiencing that with the other students, but not contributing a lot, is what that kid needs in order to get ready to be doing it on their own. So I think that's fine. And I just wanted to step off my soapbox now about that. Here's what it looks like when we get to that do the work part. So they have a title. This was their selection of the text. So in this activity, I gave them a choice of working in a group or by themselves. It says group, but they always have the opportunity to be in a group by themselves. And then I also gave them a choice of 4 different videos. Something here was going to interest them. Hula dancing, rhinos. That lady was doing a goat sanctuary thing. There's another set of 4 of them on the next page. So they had a lot of choices. You could just give them 4 choices. I did have to talk a little bit about, the first time I think it was just this one, and they only had these 4 choices. And I did have to talk about choosing. So you're not going to have enough time to watch every single video. Which one is a topic that you're interested in? Choose it and watch that one. because you will sometimes have kids, especially like in in-person class during reading time. You know what I'm talking about. You have the choosers, the kids who are always choosing a book but never reading a book. That can still happen. They might watch all 4 videos and never do a presentation. So you want to encourage them to be fast with their choices, and they'll figure that out real quick when their work isn't done, when the time is up. Now, this is what their slides looked like. I gave them 3 slides with a reminder of what was supposed to be on each slide. And that's it. Once they get comfortable with doing this, I wouldn't even give them this much. I would just give them that first slide with the choices, and they would make their 3 slides because they would know how to do it. What happens? So this is a student example from one of those films. This is the summary page. The Apache tribe started a skateboard brand to keep the kids together and give them something to do in their reservation. The Apache people went through a lot of hard times in the past, and this is a way for them to come together in good times. It's a great summary. Then we get on to the how does it happen? We're focusing on text structure. Now, this student identified 2 different types of text structures that could have been involved in this topic. I would prefer they just did 1, but I think they were trying to impress me. But I would like to point out that this student, in the example I'm showing you, was not my top student. This was a student during distance learning who had an IEP and had always struggled in school. So anybody can be successful at this. So how does it happen? Cause and effect. Each skateboarder introduced seemed to have some good or bad that affected their lives a lot when they were much younger than they are currently. So that caused them, I love that this kid noticed that caused them to have this skateboarding thing be a big impact in their lives in a positive way. I also love the compare and contrast that he pointed out here. It's comparing the older generation with the different thinking that the new generation has. It's amazing. Then the last part, why is it important? So was there a call to action? Is it new thinking that we're being introduced to? Is there an argument that's being made? Is there a thesis? It's a new way of thinking. The new generation is doing things differently than the old generation. The kids are making new ways to have fun together on the reservation and to keep the kids together. So, excellent example from a student that I loved. Present to class. Another opportunity to give choices. Do I want them all to actually present live? Yes, I do. But again, like that example with the kid who always worked in groups but wasn't really doing the work, who then all of a sudden was doing the work and being amazing, sometimes kids need some practice first. And doing a video presentation is a great way for kids to practice, because if you mess up, you're not in a room full of people watching you and you can just restart. It's a good way to practice, and then they'll get good enough at it that they can present in class. But there's a couple of tools that you can use. I'm using Screencastify right now. Google is coming out in the fall. Google is going to have a screencasting extension built right into slides. I'm super excited about that big announcement. So look for that in the fall. It should be available. If you're doing presentations in live class, this is a must. It is super engaging for the students. They are excited. They feel professional. It is a remote for a presentation remote. I think it was like $19 on Amazon, and it was one of the best purchases that I made. Number one, when kids were presenting, they didn't stop and say, next slide. Oh, I hated that so much. So it got that problem to go away, but it also just made them like, I don't know, their presentation game just leveled up a little bit because of this one tiny little tool. So I highly recommend getting a presentation remote. Here's my example that I did for the students from those National Geographic short films. So I did an example for them first because it was their first time. That example you saw was their first time. And here it is. It's very short.
The story that I'll be talking about today is Detroit's urban beekeepers are transforming the city's vacant lots, from National Geographic. It's a short film. So what happens in this text is that a couple of sweet urban farmers in Motor City, Detroit, break stereotypes while educating and inspiring others in their community through the development of creating apiaries in vacant lots throughout their city. How does it happen? The text is structured in a problem and solution text structure, and the problems that are addressed in this text is that there are a lot of vacant lots and abandoned properties in Detroit, and the honeybee populations are in decline. So these people saw the problems and thought about how they could solve these problems doing something that was beneficial to everyone in their community. And they started to transform some vacant lots into apiaries. And an apiary is a place where there's honeycombs that live there in little communities, little bee communities. Why is it important? So the message in this film was to inspire other people and to let them know that people who belong to a community can contribute to and provide for that community in a way that revitalizes the lives of everyone around them.
So a couple of things that I would have pointed out to that student whose example I just showed was, well, my big lesson in this was talking beyond the text. So yes, you want to talk about what the text that's on your slide, but you want to say a little bit more and not just read directly what's on your slide. And I emphasize that with the students a lot. Like, I can read your slide for myself. What are you going to tell me about what's on that slide? And then the other thing, which I would have encouraged the student from the example to do, is to make a little bit more edits to the template, make it your own, and to make it a little bit more visually appealing. You could see the difference between his example and my example. And as they get better at doing it with practice, they'll have more time to put into making it pretty at the end, but always the work comes first. So maybe in the beginning, they aren't going to have time to make it pretty. But as they see other kids presenting, this is something that happened a lot in my class. Somebody would see somebody do something in their presentation, and then the next week, 5, 6 more kids were doing that because they liked it and it was cool. So there's so much learning that happens with the presentations versus just writing something down, taking a quiz by yourself and nobody, sees or hears anything about it on a text versus presenting on the text. Big difference, big benefits.
The story that
How do I go on to the next? There we go. So next thing is what's happening with the other kids while that presentation is going on. Early on in my experience with doing presentations in class, and I've been doing presentations in class for at least 4 years, the digital type, not the stand up and talk about your book type. And one thing that did happen was there would be some kids doing some shenanigans off in the corner in the back of the room. So how do you get everyone participating? Because it can be hard, especially early on when kids aren't doing the greatest job presenting, and you have to sit through 30 presentations where a kid has their back turned to the class and they're reading off a slide. That's going to happen in the beginning. They will get better, but it is going to happen. So a couple of ways to get around that is that number one, have them all do it together, whole class in a Nearpod. Everyone is participating at that point. But another thing that I did was this presentation tic-tac-toe. So nonfiction things that might come up. Now, if you're only doing one text, all of these things are not going to get talked about. This is everybody was doing different text. All those National Geographic videos had different types of text structure, so this would be fine. You would need to make something different if it was just compare and contrast. Then maybe you might want to put some signal words on your tic-tac-toe. And when an audience member hears a presenter say a signal word that you wanted to highlight, or maybe it's vocabulary words, there's really no right or wrong way to do this. It's just a way to keep the kids engaged while there's presentations. So they would record something that they had heard. There's a bottom on this page where they can write down the things. And then I would give them an extra point on there. If we're grading these, I'd give them an extra point for submitting this. Another thing that I would also use, so not just the tic-tac-toe, but this works really well also. And this is for video presentations. So how do you know that the kids are going to watch all those video presentations? Well, you can have them do it in Flipgrid, and then I would give them a prompt. If we're all doing text that's on a similar topic, give them a prompt and then have them summarize what they said, summarize two other people's responses, and they would have to comment on the Flipgrid as well. And then, how has your thinking about this topic changed? And they would write I used to think, but now I think sentence there. This is something I use all the time, all the time, all the time, all the time. It's one of my favorite things. Back to that reflecting and the portfolios again. So I had mentioned before about when it's digital like this, especially if it's a video, even better. Kids can go back and look at their earlier attempts at doing these presentations and compare them to what they're doing now. And I have like prompts that I give them in order to write about their comparison. I don't think I had those prompts in place at this time when this student did this, but you can see how powerful that is. So I want to compare and contrast, and they named the titles of the two text talks that they did. These two pieces of work, because it really shows how much of an improvement I've done from the beginning of the year to the end. One good change that I've seen is that my writing has gotten better and my content and information writing is also better. Win, win, win. So not only are kids getting better at reading, better at speaking and presenting, but they are also getting better at their writing. Another reason that reflecting is so powerful is because I have noticed with doing these digital portfolios and having them do these reflection pieces on there, students don't see the progress that they have made. It is the weirdest thing to me, but they really and truly do not see the progress that they have made. And when they look at what they did before versus what they're doing now, the pieces that I read from them in their reflections, it's shocking how much growth that they have made. They're shocked by it because they don't realize it as they are making this progress. They're not like conscious of how much better this was than last time. They just don't. They only see where they're at right now, and they don't see all the work that they did and all the learning that they did to get there. So reflection is so powerful. What about grading? So I would recommend if you're going to do grading, do it while they're presenting. There's a couple of different ways that you can do it, whatever you're comfortable using. This is a rubric about their presentation, the content, the slides, and that's the technology elements of it. Not my favorite. This rubric is not my favorite. It's one of my earlier iterations of how am I going to grade this. Usually I'll go through several phases before I come up with something that works for me and for the students. This wasn't my favorite. This was a little bit better. It was a little bit easier. The kids understood this better. So I just had criteria. Did you do this? Yes, you did it. 2 points. Very simple. I did it while they were presenting. The assignments in my grade book were always 10 points, so it would all be very making sense to the students because they don't understand in 6th grade when it's their first time getting grades the difference between a 100-point assignment and a 10-point assignment. They just don't. And it's so much easier just to make everything work the same. But I'm not going to go into a big grading debate right now. It's super simple. Simple version. But this was a later version. So with those portfolios, later on in the year when we're doing assignments where you're comparing things, I wanted to be more focused on the standards. How is their portfolio showing their learning of these standards, these skills that are within that standard? So I would give them something like this to add into their reflection. The examples I showed on here are older examples, but this can kind of help them craft a reflection that kind of supports their identification of growth areas. Here's another example of a student reflection. I know I'm showing a lot of these and I'm pushing it because it really was an amazing thing in my classroom. This student said, I had to go in front of the whole class and present like 8 whole slides, which is totally not true. It was never 8 slides. And I was pretty nervous and I was also kind of scared, but now I feel confident. I love hearing that. To go in front of the whole class and present. Again, so transformational to repeat. Building confidence. So important. I can see that I shortened it. For example, I'm doing it on the BKs I did, and before, I mainly wrote what I was going to say on the slide, and they were most likely reading it to the class as well. It will happen in the beginning. Now, here's the big win. Now I do bullet points, which act like main ideas, and I develop on those ideas. Sorry, I had to clap a little bit. I was so happy about that development in the students' work. And it wasn't just one student, all of the students, like over time, as they are practicing, they are learning how to identify some main ideas and just put phrases on their slides to help them remember what to say and not reading slides to us. That's it for the nonfiction. I will do another video where I talk about fiction, how I use the same strategy for fiction, and I'll talk a little bit more about Flipgrid and screencasting and how you could use both together to do something really cool, but for another time. Thanks for watching my videos. I hope you're liking them. Subscribe to my channel. Let me know if it's helpful. If you have questions, that lets me know, hey, I should make a video about this because it wasn't very clear. Check out my blog. It's not quite published yet. About 2 weeks from now, it'll go live. Right now, it just says coming soon. And yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching.